John Carter was an ordinary human living on Earth, serving as a young officer in the interstellar fleet. He had always dreamed of adventure, but never imagined anything like this. One morning, John received a message from the Galactic Council. The message was simple, but shocking. Humanity had unknowingly broken an interstellar law, and the Council had decided on a punishment and a solution. John was to marry the youngest princess of the Scifi, a powerful alien race known for their intelligence and strength. John could not believe his eyes. He stared at the message, reading it again and again. Marry an alien princess? He had never even met an alien. He thought about his life, his friends, and his quiet apartment on Earth. None of this prepared him for what was coming. Despite his fear, John knew he had no choice. He had to follow the order. Within hours, John was on a spacecraft headed for the Scifi homeworld. The journey was long, and John spent most of the time looking out of the small window at the stars. He had seen space before, but never like this. The stars seemed brighter, and the colors more vivid. His heart raced with a mix of excitement and anxiety. As the ship approached the Scifi system, John could see the alien world from afar. It was unlike anything he had imagined. The planet had floating cities that hovered above the surface, connected by beams of light. The skies were filled with strange, glowing creatures, moving gracefully through the air. John felt both awe and fear. This world was beautiful, but it was also alien in every way. When John arrived at the Scifi Palace, he was greeted by the royal advisors. They were tall, elegant, and moved with perfect grace. Their skin had a faint shimmer, and their eyes glowed softly. They welcomed him politely, but with a distance that reminded John he was an outsider. He realized that nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. Finally, he was introduced to Princess Lila. She was young, smaller than John expected, but her presence was commanding. Her eyes were large and bright, and she studied him quietly, as if she could see everything about him. John felt nervous under her gaze. He tried to smile, but it felt awkward and small compared to her presence. Lila spoke, her voice soft but firm. She welcomed John and explained the customs of her people. John listened carefully, trying to remember every word. He felt a mix of fear and fascination. Lila was not like any person he had ever met. She was calm, intelligent, and seemed to understand more about him than he did himself. Over the next few days, John learned about the Scifi world. Their cities floated above the ground, held up by unknown technology. The streets were filled with aliens moving gracefully, performing tasks with precision and skill. John felt clumsy and out of place. He tried to walk like them, to move with their grace, but every attempt reminded him that he was human. Humans were strong, but slow. Humans were brave, but fragile. John also learned about the Scifi traditions. Marriage was not just a personal choice, it was a duty to the people. By marrying Lila, John would be part of the Scifi world, bridging the gap between humans and aliens. The thought was overwhelming. He was just one human, and now he was expected to play a role in the destiny of an entire civilization. Despite his fear, John began to observe Lila more closely. She was quiet and serious, but there were moments when she smiled softly, and her face seemed to light up. He noticed how she watched him, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. It was a strange feeling, being observed so closely, yet feeling safe at the same time. John also met Lila's family. Her older sisters were impressive warriors, skilled in combat and strategy. They tested John gently, asking him questions about human culture and abilities. John answered honestly, sometimes fumbling, sometimes impressing them with human ingenuity. They seemed to accept him slowly, though their expressions were always careful and measured. One evening, John and Lila walked together in the palace gardens. The plants glowed softly under the alien moonlight. Lila asked him about Earth, about humans, and about his life. John told her stories of his childhood, his family, and his dreams. Lila listened quietly, nodding occasionally, her eyes thoughtful. John realized that despite her youth, she was wise beyond his understanding. As days passed, John felt a strange connection with Lila. It was not love yet, but it was respect and trust. He saw that she was more than a princess. She was a leader, a warrior, and a thinker. He wondered how he, a human, could ever live up to her world. Yet he felt a spark of determination. He wanted to be worthy, not just for the council or for duty, but for Lila herself. One night, a warning alarm went off in the palace. Aliens from a hostile faction were approaching the planet. John and Lila were taken to a secure chamber while the palace prepared for defense. John realized that this was his first real test. The peaceful introduction to the Zafari world was over. Danger had arrived, and he would have to act. In the chamber, John and Lila talked quietly. Lila explained her fears and her hopes. She trusted John with her thoughts, and for the first time, John felt that he was more than an outsider. He was a partner. Together, they would face what was coming. The first part of John's journey ended not with a battle, but with understanding. He had entered an alien world as a human, scared and unprepared. Yet, he had begun to understand the people, their ways, and the princess he was ordered to marry. Something was shifting inside him. He realized that this mission, which seemed impossible, could change him forever. John lay awake that night, thinking about Lila, the Zafari world, and the future. Fear was still there, but so was curiosity. He knew that whatever came next, he had to be ready. He had to prove that humans, though fragile, could stand alongside the greatest of alien civilizations. And in that thought, John felt a small, growing sense of hope. After the initial shock of arriving on the Zafari world, John Carter had begun his new life as the human chosen to marry Princess Lila. The palace, with its glowing walls and floating walkways, was both fascinating and intimidating. Every day brought new lessons and new challenges. John needed to learn the Zafari ways, understand their culture, and navigate a world far beyond his own experience. The first days of training were the hardest. The Zafari moved differently, faster, and with more control than humans. Even walking across a floating walkway required balance and focus. John stumbled often, his human body unaccustomed to their environment. Lila, observing him, offered gentle guidance. Her movements were precise, graceful, almost effortless, and John found himself both frustrated and inspired. He wanted to keep up, to show that he could match her world, even if just a little. Lila introduced John to her sisters, who were older and stronger. They were skilled in combat, diplomacy, and strategy. Their eyes often tested him, silently judging his abilities and his worthiness. John was nervous but honest. He told them about human strengths and weaknesses, about how humans relied on courage, teamwork, and creativity. The sisters listened with interest, sometimes amused, sometimes skeptical. John knew he had to earn their respect. Every day, John spent hours learning the Zafari language, studying customs, and practicing physical exercises. It was exhausting, and often he felt like giving up. But Lila never let him quit. She encouraged him with small smiles, with words of support, and sometimes with a quiet presence that reassured him even without speaking. John realized that she was not only a princess, but also a teacher. She pushed him to become more than he had ever been. The palace was filled with wonders. Gardens floated in mid-air, streams of glowing water moved against gravity, and creatures of strange shapes and colors roamed freely. John was fascinated, but he also felt a pang of homesickness. He missed Earth, his family, and the simple life he had known. Lila noticed his longing and sometimes spoke of Earth, asking questions about humans and their way of life. John found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone else, and Lila listened with a kind of quiet awe. One day, Lila took John to a training arena where the young Zafari practiced their abilities. She demonstrated combat techniques, moving with speed and precision. John tried to mimic her, but his movements were slower and heavier. He fell multiple times, scraping his hands and knees. Lila helped him up each time, correcting his stance and encouraging him to try again. Despite the physical strain, John began to feel stronger, more capable, and more confident in his human body. As John improved, Lila began to trust him more. She shared some of her thoughts about the challenges of being a princess, about the responsibilities she bore even at her young age. John listened, understanding that her life was filled with pressures he could hardly imagine. He began to see her not just as a royal figure, but as a young woman trying to navigate a world full of expectations and dangers. During one evening walk, John asked Lila why she seemed so calm, so certain in her actions. Lila paused and looked at him with a thoughtful expression. She explained that the Zafari learned early how to control their emotions and their minds, how to remain aware and focused in any situation. John realized that her calmness was not arrogance, but discipline. It was a lesson he had to learn as well if he wanted to survive and thrive in this new world. Over the weeks, John and Lila began to spend more time together outside of lessons. They talked about their lives, shared small jokes, and laughed at the differences between humans and Zafari. John found that he could relax around her, and Lila began to show glimpses of her personality beyond the princess. She was curious, playful at times, and even teased him lightly when he made mistakes. These moments made John feel a connection growing between them. One afternoon, while exploring the floating gardens, John noticed a hidden chamber. Lila explained that it was a secret place used for meditation and reflection. The chamber was filled with soft light, and the air was calm. Lila invited John to join her in practicing focus exercises. He struggled at first, finding it difficult to quiet his thoughts. Lila guided him patiently, showing him how to breathe, how to center his mind, and how to feel his surroundings. John began to feel a small shift within himself. For the first time, he felt that he belonged in this world, not just as an outsider, but as someone who could learn and adapt. Life in the palace was not without tension. There were still political pressures, whispers of doubt among the Zafari advisors, and occasional tests of loyalty. John had to prove himself constantly, showing that humans were not weak or incapable. In one council meeting, an advisor questioned John's ability to understand Zafari strategy. John, nervous but determined, explained human problem-solving methods, how humans relied on adaptability, creativity, and courage. The council members were intrigued, and some nodded in approval. John realized that he could bring value, even as a human, in a world so different from his own. One evening, an urgent message arrived. A small fleet from a neighboring hostile alien faction was approaching Zafari space. John and Lila were taken to a strategic planning room. Lila explained the situation, showing John maps and plans. John listened carefully, feeling both fear and determination. He realized that this was the first time he would have to act not just as a human or a student, but as a partner in a real crisis. He focused on what he could do to help, knowing that Lila trusted him to contribute. In the days leading up to the potential conflict, John trained harder than ever. Lila guided him in combat drills, strategic thinking, and quick decision-making. John learned to anticipate movements, to use his human ingenuity, and to rely on his instincts. Lila was impressed by his determination and resilience. She began to see him not as a mere human assigned to a duty, but as someone capable of courage and wisdom. As the tension grew, John and Lila spent quiet moments together, sharing thoughts and fears. Lila spoke of her hope for peace, of her desire to protect her people, and of her curiosity about humans. John shared his own fears and his determination to be worthy of the role he had been given. They began to understand each other in ways that transcended words. Trust and respect were forming, laying the foundation for something deeper. One night, while observing the stars from a floating balcony, John realized how far he had come. Just weeks ago, he had been an ordinary human, confused and scared. Now he was learning to navigate a complex alien world, to contribute to a civilization far beyond his own, and to connect with a princess whose life was as challenging as it was fascinating. He understood that his journey was only beginning, but he felt stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. Part 2 of John's journey closed with him standing beside Lila, ready to face the challenges ahead. He knew that danger was coming, that his skills would be tested, and that the bonds he was forming with Lila and her people would be crucial. Yet he felt a sense of purpose, a sense of hope, and a growing belief that humans could rise to meet even the greatest challenges of the galaxy. The day of the crisis arrived. A hostile fleet had entered Scifi space, and the palace was alive with activity. John Carter felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He was no longer just a human visitor or a student. He was expected to participate in real strategy, real decisions, and perhaps real danger. His hands trembled slightly, but he focused on breathing, on thinking clearly, just as Lila had taught him. Lila stood beside him, calm and poised. Her eyes scanned the star maps, her mind working quickly. John watched her, amazed at her control and intelligence. He realized that despite the alien differences, they shared a desire to protect their people and do what was right. That shared purpose gave him strength. The council had gathered to discuss tactics. Scifi generals and advisors debated strategies in their soft, melodic language, which John could barely follow. He tried to focus on patterns and logic, using what he had learned about human thinking. When the conversation turned to a risky maneuver that could endanger the capital, John raised his hand hesitantly. Lila encouraged him, and he explained a human strategy, simple, bold, and unexpected. The room went quiet. The idea was not perfect, but it was different. After discussion, the council agreed to try it. John felt a surge of confidence. He was contributing. Hours later, the battle began. John and Lila were on the bridge of a command ship, observing the fleet movements. The Scifi ships glowed with energy, moving gracefully through space. The enemy fleet advanced aggressively, but John noticed patterns that the Scifi had missed. He suggested a small adjustment, directing a few ships to positions that created an opening. Lila nodded and relayed the instructions. John's human instincts had helped avert disaster. As the battle continued, John realized the enemy was more cunning than he had anticipated. The human problem-solving skills he had relied on were tested. He remembered Lila's lessons about patience and observation. By combining human creativity with Scifi tactics, he was able to suggest further maneuvers that turned the tide in their favor. Lila's trust in him grew, and she began to act even faster, confident in his judgment. After the initial clash, the fleet retreated to regroup. John and Lila were exhausted but determined. They walked through the command chambers, observing injured pilots and damaged ships. John felt the weight of responsibility again, seeing the risks of battle firsthand. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but action despite it. Lila moved beside him silently, understanding his feelings without words. During a quiet moment, Lila shared her thoughts with John. She spoke of the pressure of her role, of her fears for her people, and of the loneliness that came with being a princess. John listened carefully, offering support and understanding. For the first time, he realized that Lila's strength was not only in her abilities, but also in her willingness to share her burdens with someone she trusted. That trust deepened their connection. The following days were intense. John continued to assist in planning, learning to read the patterns of battle and anticipate enemy movements. He trained with Lila and her sisters, improving his physical abilities and tactical thinking. Despite the exhaustion, John felt alive in a way he had never known. The challenge of being human in a world of aliens made every success feel meaningful. One evening, while repairing a small fleet shuttle, John and Lila spoke about their lives. Lila asked questions about Earth, about humans, and about the emotions John felt. He shared stories of human kindness, humor, and resilience. Lila listened intently, fascinated by the differences and similarities between their species. They laughed together, and for a moment, the dangers of war felt distant. John realized that even in the midst of crisis, they were forming a bond that could survive anything. A few days later, a scout reported a surprise attack. A group of enemy ships had bypassed the main fleet and were heading straight for the capital city. John and Lila immediately organized a response. Using a combination of Zafari energy shields and human ingenuity, they set up defenses to protect the city. John suggested using decoy ships to distract the enemy, while Lila coordinated the defense fleet. The plan worked, slowing the enemy and allowing the Zafari to regroup. During the battle, John noticed a small enemy ship sneaking past the defenses. Without hesitation, he piloted a Zafari interceptor, relying on his instincts and training. Lila followed him closely, using her psychic abilities to guide his movements. Together, they intercepted the enemy ship and prevented major damage. John felt a rush of adrenaline and pride. He was no longer just a human outsider. He was a crucial part of the Zafari defense. After the battle, the palace celebrated the victory. John received recognition from the council and praise from Lila. Her eyes held a mix of admiration and gratitude. John realized that their partnership had grown beyond duty or orders. They had become a team, relying on each other in life and death situations. Respect and trust had formed the foundation of their bond. In the following days, John continued to learn about the Zafari world, not just as a student, but as a participant. He studied their history, their philosophy, and their culture. Lila guided him, answering questions and encouraging curiosity. John discovered that the Zafari were not just warriors, but thinkers and dreamers. He felt honored to be part of their society, even as a human. One afternoon, while exploring a floating garden, John and Lila talked about the future. Lila expressed her hope for peace, for cooperation between humans and Zafari, and for a world where both species could learn from each other. John shared his dreams of building bridges between their civilizations, of showing that humans were capable of courage, wisdom, and compassion. Together, they envisioned a future that was brighter than any single life could hold. Part 3 of John's journey ended with a sense of accomplishment and growth. He had faced real danger, made critical decisions, and proven his worth to the Zafari people. More importantly, he had formed a deep connection with Lila, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The challenges ahead would be greater, but John felt ready. He had grown from a simple human into a partner capable of standing beside a princess in a world far beyond anything he had imagined.